So The Simpsons could be cancelled because the voice actors refused to take a 45% pay cut. Yes, the answer is true.
First, I'm asking if you'd take a pay cut to save a colleague's job. Apparently 60% of us would, which is a slightly more positive spin on the story than the Telegraph offered. Obviously, it's all going to depend on the size of the cut. Britain's average wage, 26 grand a year. So a 1% cut, if we forget about tax, equates to a fiver less in your £500 a week pay packet. A 5% cut would see that rise to £25. A 20% cut, where you're looking at £100 off that pre-tax £500 a week pay packet. Don't forget, pre-tax. So, would you, should you, consider taking a cut to save a colleague? Wasn't that kind of what trade unions were set up for? Not to take cuts, but so that workers could stand together to force bosses to play and pay fairly. But we now end up in a situation where people do take cuts. We've had done on this show. While council workers in Blackpool agreed to take 4 days unpaid holiday, equal to a 2% drop in pay, to save 100 jobs. And that deal was, in fact, brokered by unions. Now, humans have evolved because we are, evolved to be caring social animals, because that is how we have worked out is the best way to survive. But I guess that only works up to a point. So what is your cut-off pay rise before you would let a colleague face the chop?
If we're talking about wage cuts, let's be quite clear that this isn't about generosity or not generosity. It is actually about public policy at the moment. This is what I was saying about the Cameron speech. This is what they are actually doing, is deliberately trying to set up mechanisms that force people to take less. By dressing it up as the idea that it's an act of generosity, this is all part of the hoax, because it doesn't necessarily save the jobs anyway. That's just, you know, just watch this space, see what happens further down the line. All they're trying to do is force wages down. It's what the unions call the race to the bottom. That's what they're trying to do, is create a situation in which everybody is trying to, in a sense, undersell themselves to actually earn less so the bosses can take more. It is really that simple.
So,
now, but if we're going to be generous, we have the mechanisms to be generous. It's called the National Health Service. It's called the education system. Taxation was brought in so we can look after each other. Taxation was an act of love. So what we do is we tax ourselves in order to look after the most needy. From those with the most ability, we serve those with the most needs. That's how we worked it out. But what you've got is a government that's demolishing that system and then saying take a wage cut instead. But that is crazy. Of course, we would all do what you two are both saying. Of course you would do that to your friend and so on, because, but that's a different process. We're talking about work where there's a contract.
Right.
And the contract is there. Whatever you do, I would say to anybody in work, before you do anything about taking a wage cut, do whatever you do collectively. In other words, all of you in a workplace, sit down, ideally through a union, or if you can't do it through a union, but anyway, ideally through a union, and decide whatever you do together. Because if you end up start doing it in 2s and 3s and so on, boss goes lovely.
What about union bosses living in council houses? What about union bosses living in big houses, sometimes worth millions of pounds on 3-figure salaries? What do we think about union bosses lording it up, rather like capital bosses?
Yes, yeah. In my ideal world, indeed, union bosses would be on the same more or less average of the workers in their unions. Of course, that's right, and there'd be immediate recall. You wouldn't have this thing of becoming a union boss at the age of 35 and lasting until you're 65. No, of course, because, you know, after all, trade unions were the people who partly invented democracy. And the point about democracy is it should work. It should work so that you can have recall and that people are equals. Yes, ideally, absolutely right, of course.
I love this.
Okay, we have Jennifer on line 3.
What about you, Jennifer?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I was just wanting to say that I would definitely take a pay cut to save a pal's job, but I don't think that's realistic in this day and age. People are sitting on the edge of their seats waiting to lose their jobs.
Yep.
My sister has taken 2 serious wage cuts. You're not talking 5 pence, you're talking thousands. Now, they laid off everybody on the bottom of the pile, and they've now got a system. If you wait one error, one tiny little speck of an error, a spelling mistake on the computer or anything, you get 2 errors and you're out the door.
This is exactly what Michael was saying.
I think the employer has the upper hand now because they know they can fire people or get rid of them for some stupid reason and hire someone for half the salary.
Yeah.
So this is exactly...
They're so grateful to get a job nowadays. They're doing anything they're told to do in case of fear of losing their job.
Fear.
My daughter was spoken absolutely disgustingly, which I can't repeat by her boss. She says, I can't say anything because I'll just lose my job. So she's out looking for another job.
Well, or she listens to what Michael says and you get together with your colleagues and make some kind of stand, yeah?
The 21st century, people living in fear at work. You know, Dickens. We're talking about Dickens. You know, this is the thing. You know, you could be fired on the spot there. You know, the overseer would come round and say that you were talking to the girl next to you in the mill, and then you go out like that, and that was their total livelihood gone overnight. You know, when we say, you know, when Cameron talks about the big society, he's talking about charity. You know, my dad had to queue for boots for charity, and he wasn't entitled to have the boots because his mother was technically still married to her husband who was in America, so he wasn't entitled to have the boots. The whole point about all this social welfare that we brought in the 40s was to get away from that horrible stuff. That we had big society, it didn't work because it was piecemeal. And this is what they're doing. And these people, a lady there talking about her daughter living in fear in 2011, is that where we are? 2011, and people are living in fear at work because the boss might come. Who's the boss? He's just another human being. And he comes around and goes, I don't like the way you did that, I don't like the way you're dressed, gone, out, shoo. Take your cards, go. I mean, what is this?
Michael, have you thought of applying for the job of Prime Minister?
Now, we're going to leave that